Well, today is June 19th, 2023. We are talking about Parshat Korah. Parshat Korah. We should start off by saying that this Parsha is a very, very difficult Parsha on a lot of in a lot of ways. Not the least of ways is the just the way the story is told. Excuse me. It seems that there are a couple of strands of narrative here in the story, and scholars are trying to unravel the story. There are braided rebellions here, more than one rebellion, but we're going to study the text here to see what happens. And I have a specific focus of an inquiry specifically on Sheol. Just give me a second. Apologize for that. Could happen again. Okay, we'll get started. Sharing the text. All right. Do we see? This is the text. A long story. We're gonna read it. And as usual, I like to when I lay out the text like this, I think especially for people reading it on Zoom, if you don't have the book in front of you, I like to make it big print and break it up like this. And I find it's quite useful to study the text like this, to break up into its most in the smallest units. Vaikach Korah. Now there betook himself Korah, whatever that means. This is the Everett Fox translation. Ben Yitzhar, Ben Kahat, Ben Levi, son of Yitzhar, son of Kahat, son of Levi. Bedatan v'Aviram b'nei Eliyav on Ben Pelet b'nei Ruvain. So we have Datan and Aviram, and on Ben Pelet, the sons of Reuven. So we have, and here already we have, just the notion that this is a composite group. It's a group of Levites and Reubenites. Okay, that's not my concern, but it's just an observation. They rose up before Moshe with men of stature from the children of Israel, 50 and 200 leaders of the community, those called in the appointed council men of name. So Korah, Datan, and Aviram on Ben Pelet, there are those four and 250 others. They assembled against Moses and against Aaron and said to them, too much is yours, Rav Lachem, for the entire community, the entirety of them are holy, and in their midst is God. Why then do you exalt yourselves over the assembly of God? When Moshe heard, he flung himself on his face. I'll stop there for a second because I want to give you the picture, the story is, of course, lends itself to great drama because you have basically an insurrection. You have an insurrection here, a rebellion of these individuals who are saying, look, you have too much. And the key phrase here, Madua titnasu al kal Adonai. So titnasu is translated here as exalt yourselves, but titnasu is really to carry yourselves over. Titnasu is to lift yourself, like, it is. It does. We would interpret it as exalt, but in a way, linasot is to lift yourselves above. So it's like you are hovering over the people. You've made yourself higher than everyone. Why have you made yourselves higher than everyone? Okay. Moses heard, he flung himself on his face. Moses, in the last couple of Parshiot, Shlach Lecha also, he flings himself on his face. I've taken a critical approach to Moses flinging on his face. It's the kind of response that goes like, what am I going to do? It's like, oy vey's me. Like, it's the response of saying, I'm beside myself with anguish. I have no words. I only have gestures. Of course, you could also see it as saying, he is in a moment of supplication. He is so low. Okay. Then he spoke to Korah and his entire community, saying, and I guess in the moment between flinging himself on his face and speaking, he figures out what to say to them. He says, at daybreak, God will make known who is his and who is holy, and he will declare him near to him. The one that he chooses, he will declare near to him, which means, look, today is today. Tomorrow morning, we're going to square off. And tomorrow morning, God will make known. How Moses knows this, the text doesn't say, right? But Moses is sure that God will determine who is holy and who God has chosen. So he says, this is what you do. Kichu lachem machtot, take yourselves fire pans, Korah v'chol hadato, Korah and his entire community, and place fire in them, and put incense on them before the presence of God tomorrow. Why the fire pans and why incense? For one very specific reason. You'll recall that the last time we had something occur with fire pans and incense, it was a catastrophe. This was when the sanctuary was consecrated. Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron, took their fire pans and placed a foreign fire or a strange fire or an unconsecrated fire into their fire pans, their incense pans, and they tried to bring it forward. I argued at the time that this was the exuberance of youth, that is to say, trying to do something at the boundary of what is permitted and forbidden, to render it inside, to render something on the boundary permissible. But what they didn't realize, Nadav and Avihu at the time, was that the most potent part of the sacrificial enterprise and the most potent element of the sanctuary was incense. For reasons that I am not particularly certain of myself, and I haven't done enough research on, the incense is the superpower, the super element of the whole sanctuary structure. Rabbi Benny Lau, in his commentaries that I watch, he calls it the unconventional weapon of the sanctuary, right? Neshek unconventionally, right? It's the most powerful element. The normal elements are the sacrifices, the different kinds of sacrifices, and there's a whole hierarchy of sacrifices. But this is above and beyond that, and why that is not completely clear to me. My best guess is that the incense creates a smoke, and the smoke itself is the blinding element that is most closely related to the cloud. And the cloud is God's presence.
Where did this come from?
Invokes
Found it in the map?
the presence of God. Okay? That's why I think that's the best I can do. But and we have later in this Parsha the plague that breaks out, and what they're supposed to do is take incense and burn it in among the place so that the plague will disappear, which is why when the pandemic started 3 years ago in March of 2020, it was not uncommon to hear pious people recount that the one prayer that you should pray, or you should be doing a couple of things, pray the psalm that invokes, the idea of chasing away a pandemic, and also recite the passage in the Mishnah and in the rabbinic writings that relate to the incense. That way we will have some kind of prophylactic effect on the pandemic, and the jury is out as to whether or not that worked. Okay. Vaya, and it shall be, the man whom God chooses, he is the Holy One. Too much is yours, sons of Levi. And Moshe said to Korah, now hearken, sons of Levi. Is it too little for you that the God of Israel has separated you from the community of Israel to bring you near to him, to serve the serving tasks of the dwelling of God, to stand before the community, to attend on them? He has brought near you and all your brothers, the sons of Levi, with you. Would you seek the priesthood as well? Truly, it is you and your entire community who come together against God. As for Aaron, what is wrong with him that you should grumble against him? Moshe sent to call Datan and Aviram, the sons of Eliav, but they said, we will not go up. Is it too little that you have brought us up from a land flowing with milk and honey to cause our death in the wilderness, that you should play the prince over us, even the prince? Then too, not to a land flowing with milk and honey have you brought us, nor have you given us an inheritance of field and vineyard. The eyes of these men would you gouge out? We will not go up. And Moshe became exceedingly upset. He said to God, do not turn your face toward their grain gift. Not one donkey of theirs have I carried off. I have not done ill to one of them. Moshe said to Korah, you and your entire community be there before the presence of God, you and they and Aaron tomorrow. And take each man his pan, place on them smoking incense, and bring it near before the presence of God. Each man his pan, 50 and 200 pans, and also you and Aaron, each man his pan. So they took each man his pan, and placed on them fire, and put on them smoking incense, and stood at the entrance to the tent of appointment, as did Moshe and Aaron. And Korah and his entire community assembled against them at the entrance to the tent of appointment. Now the glory of God was seen by the entire community. And God said to Moshe and Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from the midst of the community, that I may finish them off in an instant. They flung themselves on their faces and said, O God, God of spirits of all flesh, when one man sins at the entire community, will you be furious? God spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the community, saying, go up from around the dwelling place of Korah, Datan and Aviram. Moshe arose and went to Datan and Aviram, and there went after him the elders of Israel. And he spoke to the community, saying, pray, turn away from the tents of these wicked. Do not touch anything that is theirs, lest you be swept away in all their sins. They went up from the dwellings of Datan and Aviram all around. Now Datan and Aviram had come out, stationed at the entrance of the tents, with their wives, their children, their little ones. Moshe said, by this you shall know that God sent me to do all these deeds, that it was not from my own heart. If, like the death of all humans, these men die, and the calling to account of all humans is accounted upon them, it is not God who has sent me. But if God creates a new creation, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows up them and all that is theirs, they go down alive into Sheol, vayaradu chayim she'ola, then you will know that these men have scorned God. Now it was just as he finished speaking all these words, that the ground was split, the ground that was beneath them split. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed up them and their households, all the human beings who belonged to Korah and all the property. So they went down, they and theirs, Chayim Sheolah, alive to Sheol. And the earth covered them, and they vanished from the midst of the assembly. Now all Israel that were around them fled at the sound of their voice, for they said, lest the earth swallow us up. And the fire went out from before the presence of God and consumed the 50 and 200 men, those bringing their incense. I'm going to stop there, okay? Because that's really where the story is. The story will go, but we have this really a cataclysm. And I'm not really sure how to explain it other than it's something that we have to conjure in our imaginations. And then I think where I'm going to go here is that the story is in the details. As always, we'll get information by trying to look at the details, and the details are very complicated. So I want to focus on one detail, which is, and one question, which is, why do they get punished in this way? You know, in the Torah already, we have seen on several occasions that there are punishments that are executed on people for grave sins. For example, if you recall, in the book of Leviticus, there's that individual curses God. So what happens following that is Moses figures out what to do with that person, and all of the people who have heard that curse are to do a smicha, they're to place a hand on them, and then they are to they're the ones that stone him. Okay, and so it sounds strange, but they are affected by the curse of, or the misuse of God's name. So the people that heard it are the ones that have to stone the individual. Similarly, this week or last week, we read about the person gathering wood, and gathering wood on Shabbat is a grave sin in the Bible, not because it's, a violation of the law, but it's a violation of the covenant. And these covenant violations are capital crimes. And so the individual is stoned by the community. We don't have in the Torah a case of murder, that is to say, first-degree murder. We do have a case of manslaughter, which results in exile. That's Cain and Abel, which I read not as a murder, but as a manslaughter. If it were a murder, then Cain would have had to be put to death. Similarly, Moses doesn't murder the Egyptian. Moses commits manslaughter, and we discern that based on the penalty, that Moses' penalty is exile because Pharaoh wants to avenge that death, not by executing him in a court of law, but by doing a summary extrajudicial execution. So it appears that the convention of that in the Torah is that manslaughter results in exile. And that is clear in the laws relating to involuntary homicide that we'll see later on in the book of Numbers and in the book of Deuteronomy, where a person who commits a manslaughter has to run to a city of refuge and has an amnesty when the Kohen Gadol dies. So here, we're not really sure, the Torah, the story doesn't tell us beyond, the narrative, what crime has Korah committed. and why does he get this punishment? And if we follow, and here my premise here, and arguably it may not necessarily be the premise, but I'm going to say that there has to be a reason. The premise is that the punishment has to fit the crime. That's the way the Bible works, midah keneged midah. And if that's the case, how does the punishment fit the crime? And how does the earth swallowing up Korah fit the crime that Korah has committed? That's the order that I've given myself here. Okay, but before that, I'll take your any observations or questions or comments on the story before anything that may be puzzling to you, because the story had a lot of details. Anybody want to start with a question on anything? Let's give me a chance to sip some water. Okay. All right. So,
hold on, Stephen has a question.
I have a question. Go ahead, Stephen.
So if Korah and company disappeared into Neverland, why do we have Psalms saying sons of Korah?
So the sons of Korah still existed. Okay, it's not. I mean, some of the, his relationships, perished with him, but they survived and they became pious Levites, and so there is an attribution of Psalms in the book of Psalms to the Bnei Korah. Lama natzeret livnei Korah.
Right.
All right. Any other questions? All right. So for this excursus, we have to look at, we do the exercise that any, we would do with trying to figure out what Sheol is. So I have a program now. It's easier than ever, but it used to do it with a concordance. This is called Ala Torah. This is a website, and this website has something called, I've showed it before, it's called the Tanakh Laboratory, Ma'abadat HaTanakh, right? And all you do is you look up a text. I'll show you how it works. Okay, just as I'm gonna, it's hard to get this going here. Here we go. So this is, I picked Psalm 30. Psalm 30 has the word Sheol in it. Okay, so all this does, all you do is you click on Sheol, and it tells you that here it's twice that it's time. So I'm just going to put out the blue one. So Sheol, one mofim baketa, it occurs once in this passage. It's 13 times in the book of Psalms, and 48 times in the whole Tanakh. Okay, so that's what the computer is able to do for us. It tells us where the 48 that it occurs 48 times in the Tanakh. And if I want to find out where these places are, I just click here, and I get all the different, in a millisecond, I get every single reference to Sheol in the Tanakh. Okay, and so I'm going to go to, for example, Genesis 37:35. So in Genesis 37:35, Joseph was reported to his father that he's, here's his clothes. The father looks at the clothing and he says, Tarov Toraf Yosef, my Joseph is torn. And it says, Vayakumu kol banav v'chol banotav lenachamo, all his sons and daughters, as it were, Jacob's family, they try to comfort him. Vayima'en leitachem, and he refuses to be comforted. Vayomer, he says, Ki ered el bni avel she'ola, I'm going to go down to my son in mourning to Sheol, Vayefk oto aviv, and he cries. And so we have many, many other instances of the word Sheol. I'm going to close the screen here and say that the word Sheol seems to convey the netherworld. Okay, so what's happening is that they're going down to the netherworld, but this is odd. Okay, I mean, why? This is a rebellion. So in most rebellions, you take the people out and hang them, right? But they're going to go down alive to Sheol. So without going too far into this, there are a number of studies on this, and the one study that I pointed to basically collects all of these sources and comes to a very interesting kind of observation that Sheol is the place where people go when they experience an abnormal death. All right, people who are cut down in the middle of their lives. Okay, now don't make any associations of it for today, obviously, but they're people who see themselves going down to Sheol because they're being punished, and they're being punished by an abnormal death. If we go back to the text, the text says as follows. Just share the screen here. If, like the death of all humans, these men die, and the calling to account of all humans is accounted upon them, it is not God who has sent me. All right? This is a really important verse. Im kimot kol adam yimutun ele, ufkudat kol adam yipakel aleim, lo Adonai shlachani. I'll stop there for a second. So it says, there's a normal way that people die. People die normally. They live a long life. They should live to 120. And through natural causes, a person takes their last breath and passes away. That's how it happens normally. Okay, but abnormal is not at the time that God has determined for that individual, and for that reason, there must be a cause. Okay, there's causality to that. Now here, the causality for the death of Korah and the cohort is that they rebelled against Moses. Okay, so the punishment is an abnormal death. Okay, but the punishment is also that they're alive. They're alive in the underworld, and that they're going to a place that is where it's all death. And so here's the theory that one theory that I'm proposing, which is that what is it that they want to do? What they want to do, they're complaining about Moses, who has held himself high above the people. So their punishment will be that they are low, that they're placed low. What is it that they want to do? They want to be they want the priesthood. They want to function in the highest echelons, even though we're not talking about altitude here. They're talking. They want to be at the hierarchy of Israel, the ritual hierarchy of Israel. They want the priesthood, and the priesthood signifies or symbolizes the presence of the life force within the people, so that the ark and the Holy of Holies and the whole sacrificial structure, that is the pulsating life within the entire community. It's the heart that beats the life force into the community, or rather, it's the element within the communal structure that draws God's presence into the people and brings the life force into the people, because God is the ultimate source of life, and then having that role, that ritual role, brings you into close contact with the life force of the universe, which is the life force for the people, and that is going to pulsate, and that's what we want, right? We just don't want to be leaders. We want to be able to harness the nuclear core of Israel. Okay, this is my analogy, which is we don't want to be just little tech people in the reactor. We want access to the reactor itself, and we want to be able to provide the custodianship of the life force for Israel, and that's their sin. And so what they receive as punishment is that they're cut down in the middle of their days. They have an abnormal death, and they are dwelling in the the lowest rungs of the earth. They descend into the caverns of the earth, and they're concealed, and they go down there alive, which tells us that when Jacob invokes this, when Joseph, Joseph's coat is brought to him, my reading of this is that he must feel enormous guilt. The sense of guilt. I will go down to my grave, my Sheol, I will go in mourning before my years to Sheol, and it's because I feel enormous guilt in what I've done, and that's the sense of Sheol. Okay, I want to give you another example of this. Here we go. So what we do to try and figure out, biblical passages and meanings, we try and see where else it occurs. And Psalm 30 is a psalm that we recite every day. It's a psalm that's important in the daily prayer. It starts off as follows: Mizmor Shir Chanukah David, Arumimcha Adonai ki dilitani v'lo simachta oivai li. I will extol you. Aromimcha means I will raise you up, Adonai, ki dilitani, because you have scooped me up, v'lo simachta oivai li. So the imagery in this psalm is imagery of exaltation and lowness, or in quite literal terms, going down low into like the netherworld and being raised up. So it's a psalm, Adonai Elohai, Adonai Elohai, God, Shivati Alecha v'tirpaeni, I have cried to you, and you have healed me. Adonai he'elita min sheol nafshi chiyitani miyar divor. O Lord God, I cried out to you, and you healed me. O Lord, you brought me up from Sheol, preserve me from going down into the pit. Okay, let's stop there. So we have a psalm here. It's a psalm that imagines a person who it seems has experienced a terrible ordeal. What kind of ordeal? It could be an ordeal of being a prisoner. It could be an ordeal of being on the other side of an assault, a victim, or it could be an ordeal of a life and death experience, probably due to illness, a mortal illness. And so here the psalmist, the poet here writing the psalm is describing a moment of recovery from a mortal illness. Aromimcha Adonai ki dilitani, I extol you, God, because you raised me up. Aromimcha Adonai ki dilitani. Again, Adonai velo simachto evai li, you didn't let my enemies rejoice over me. Adonai Elohai shivati elecha v'tirpani, I cried out to you and you healed me. Adonai he'elita min sheol nafshi, chiyitane miyar divor. You have raised me up, he'elita min sheol, from the depths, my soul. Chiyitane, you revived me from going down. So a person who is experiencing a mortal illness, who is going to die before his or her time, is elevated and then comes up from Sheol. So where were they going? They were going to go to Sheol. So they feel a certain sense of perhaps guilt, and they their life is restored, and they recite this psalm in exaltation. And why do we recite this every morning? We recite this every morning not because we experience a mortal illness every night, but the restoration of life and vigor on a daily basis calls for that kind of exaltation. Okay, go on. Another psalm that has this: Ki en b'mavet zichrecha bishol miodelach, for there is no praise of you among the dead. In Sheol, who can acclaim you? So Sheol is a place where nothing can escape. It's the depths of the depths, and there's, since it's a place of death, nothing can emerge from there. So we have, back to the case, in the Korah episode, what they want is the source of life, and their punishment is the ultimate in death. The ultimate in death is where they're so deep in the ground that no sound can escape them. Okay. And finally, my last text here among the 48 different examples, I chose these three. Jonah, who, as you recall, Jonah runs away after being called by God to go preach to the inhabitants of Nineveh and ask them to repent. He doesn't want to do that, so he gets on a boat, and the boat encounters a storm. They cast lots to make sure to get the sea to calm itself down. Jonah gets the lot. They throw him overboard. The sea calms down, and Jonah gets swallowed up by a big fish. And in the belly of the fish, he cries out to God. Vayomer karati mitzarali. I called in my trouble. I called to God, El Adonai v'yaneni, who answered me, Mi beten Sheol shivati shamati koli. From the belly of Sheol I cried out, and you heard my voice. So in each of these cases, Sheol, the people that come out of Sheol, they're rescued, okay, because they feel a salvation. So then Korah is not rescued. So it's I guess you could say it's the ultimate purgatory. It's hell. In fact, the word Sheol gets usurped in rabbinic literature by Gehenna. Gehenna is the place that you go to when you don't, you're so evil, you'll never emerge. Okay, but it's the place of total death, and of course, the sanctuary represents total life. Okay. Well, this is what Sheol is, and there's so much more, I think, in terms of trying to and as usual, when you study about the way that we experience and encounter death in the Bible, and whether or not there's an underworld, or whether or not there's hell, or whether is there life after death? What we're really talking about is the way we relate to life, okay? Because how you understand death and how you understand, what takes place after death really is an opening for, how you live your life. Anyway, my favorite remark on this is this Talmudic passage, which I know I've taught before because it's such a favorite. This is a story. It's a story of a famous rabbi named Rabbi Bar Bar Chana. Bar Chana was a storytelling rabbi. He was, as usual, a great sage, but he had a wonderful reputation as to being a traveler, and as a traveler, he would be a great storyteller. And if these wild and fantastical tales are sprinkled all over the Talmud and other sources. So in one tale, he's on a travel and he meets an Arab. And the Arab said to him, "Come, I will show you those who were swallowed by the earth due to the sin of Korah. I saw 2 rifts in the ground that were issuing smoke. The Arab took a shearing of wool and dipped it in water and inserted it on the head of a spear and placed it in there. And then he removed the wool. It was scorched. He said to me, 'Listen to what you hear.' And I heard that they were saying, 'Moses and his Torah are true, and we in the earth, are liars.' The Arab further said to me, 'Every 30 days, Gehenna returns them to here, like meat in a pot that is moved around by the boiling water as it cooks. And every time they say this, Moses and his Torah are true, and they, that is we in the earth, are liars.'" And then it goes on. And we'll leave that there. But what's so beautiful, illustrative, maybe even humorous of this, is that by the time we get to the rabbis and by the time we understand hell is an undefined place. For Korah and in the Bible, it's a place of death, a place of where people cut down in the middle of their lives due to egregious evil. They go down, right? And they linger on there alive in this dungeon. That's the way it appears. Of course, the physics of the earthquake make it impossible to survive. The earth swallows them up, so you expect then that they perish immediately. But the biblical imagination and the rabbinic imagination beyond that actually gives them an existence in hell. They are alive there. And that's the story there. They're alive in this underworld. And if you put your ear to the ground, you hear what they're saying. You hear that Moses is true, the Torah is true, and we are liars. I always like to say this is an allegory for what hell truly is. Hell in life is having to know that you are wrong and that everybody else is right. The admission that you have made a mistake and that you have to live with your mistake and admit that other people are right, that is the living hell that people sometimes have to experience. And this is said metaphorically in this little story. And that, if you just project that back into the story in the Torah. So the vindication of Moses here, Moses' authority is intact, of course, comes at a tremendous trauma, a tremendous catastrophe. The people have to reckon with the fact that there's just been this kind of supernatural upheaval, earthquake, almost directed on cue by Moses, and that immediately, almost out of science fiction, they're gobbled up into the earth, and they're there, and the people cry. They don't know what happens, right? And they're left to the imagination, in their own imaginations, to try and figure out, what happened to these people. They were here. They were just standing by their doors, by their tents just a minute ago. And now where are they? We don't know where they are. Is that going to happen to us too? So part of the imagination is that they're dead. And that's Sheol. Part of the imagination is, since you've never seen the dead, since you've never seen them, and since you've never buried them, and since you've never had tactile, experience with their bodies, then there's some lingering thinking, imagining that they're still alive. And if they're still alive, what are they doing? Well, they're admitting their guilt for eternity. And that's what hell is. Hell is to admit your guilt and to admit that other people are right. So, rebuttals. Go ahead, Bob. I saw you shake your head. Unmute.
I'm actually having to think through a variety of things you said, because perhaps the living hell is when you're not able to admit that you were wrong and other people are right, which takes us to many commentaries, as I understand it, that this is about the lack of humility with Korah and the others, and also the jealousy of things. And I think I sent you the thing about Cain and Abel in terms of the imagination of some of the rabbis, whether in the mystical or the non-mystical tradition, that the souls, the Gilguls, were reincarnations. The cry from underneath the earth also becomes Korah and other people's destiny. The fact that I read something that the Egyptian that Moses killed was also a representation of a Gilgal from this time. And so this sort of notion that the souls reincarnate in certain ways may be one way of this not necessarily being eternal. And so for me, when I think about how you describe Sheol, perhaps it's the place, is there a difference between spiritual humility and material humility? And it's the body that goes under the ground, but not necessarily the soul per se. So it's just, there's some very interesting commentaries I ran across that further enrich this in a very dynamic way.
Yes, I mean, look, we're dealing with so many different elements here relating to how we understand death and how we understand the experience. When a person dies, what happens to the soul, and all of that. What does the Bible actually present in terms of its understanding of death? And does the Bible have any idea of this duality, the body and the soul, and the eternity of a soul? These are not biblical ideas. These are ideas that come in after the soul. And of course, even life after death and resurrection of the dead, these are ideas that come in after the Bible. Notwithstanding that, I mean, they do carry a tremendous weight in terms of both the spiritual life and the imaginative life of Judaism. Every day we pray Mechaye Metim. We pray for the resurrection of the dead. We believe that the soul is bound to bound up in the bonds of life. We present in the most traditional fashion at death the idea that the soul lives on. How that is and how we experience that is anybody's question and anybody's guess. Where I find myself presenting this idea mostly in terms of nechama and comfort to people is to say, that the dead are bound to the living. I don't know exactly how, but we the living, we are connected in ways that we can't determine, and that we can't always express, even if they are at the very minimum something like the recollection of a story, or the recollection of words, or the recollection of a deed, or the invocation of a name through our acts. All of these acts significantly, and of course the act of remembering itself. These acts are ways of connecting the dead to us, and the living community does whatever it can to maintain its connection. to the dead through invocation of all these things. As to, the whole notion of Gilgul and how a soul cycles through, these are very mystical ideas. That one soul appears in one generation, another. I mean, that requires a lot of deep speculation in the mystical realm. But here, I said it. I like to quote the Bar Bar Hana story for its I guess its comic effect, and also for its kind of wisdom that it kindles in my imagination, at least, this idea, which is that first of all, there's a traveler. The traveler is an adventurous soul. So to some extent, we're all adventurous. We all want the answers to these questions. I'll never forget. Ray Kestenbaum Archazen, he was really good at this. He let him be well. He's haven't been in touch with him for a while, but he used to ask these questions all the time. He would say, like, why isn't there a memorial to the Jews who perished in the desert? It's a great question. But it just kindles in the imagination. Like, well, what happened there? I mean, the Torah tells us all about these people, and of course, if we take the literal text, that there are hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of them. Where are their graves? What's going on? So Bar Bar Huna is one of these people that had that question, and he goes as he's reporting this travel to to his colleagues. They think he's a fool, by the way. I left out that passage where they think he's a real idiot, but he in telling the tale, of course, you get the comic effect of it, and you get the wisdom of it, which is, I know you all want to know this, and of course you're listening to me. So I'm going to tell you, here's what I heard. I put my ear to the ground, I heard them saying this. And so, if I, as a reader, listener to the story, say, here's the upshot. The upshot is, and of course they're in hell. Of course they're still alive. Of course they're saying this thing, because what could be worse than for an arrogant person? And you're right, Bob. This is about humility and arrogance. What is the comeuppance for the arrogant? The comeuppance for the arrogant is to admit that you're wrong, right? To be humbled, and that to be humbled in the most extravagant way possible, which is to be placed in the bottom of the earth. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just say one more thing along those lines? This morning, I heard just one of the most fantastic interpretations on Korah that I've ever heard, just wondrous. And I don't know where the line is, but it's that what happened to Korah was because he only used one eye. There's some sentence coming up later on there in the text. And the question that this rabbi talked about was, why were we created with two eyes? And what he said is, one eye is to sort of see to exalt Hashem and that, but the other is also to know about our own insignificance in terms of things. And
Sure.
that by only using the singular eye, they were saying that Korah basically did not recognize his own insignificance, his humility. That actually was a religious and a devout and a very important person in the community there, but that was lacking, as with others. And then the rabbi goes to the end of the Torah and says that Moses kept his vision strong even through the end, meaning he did not lose his humility, and he also continued to exalt God. And it's gave me a whole different way of thinking about vision and the eyes.
Sure, absolutely. It's a beautiful. Stanley, go ahead.
Well, there's a lot of things that puzzle me about this, but just let me bring up one. We're focusing on Korah, and we see him as the bad guy and not having faith in Moses and therefore in God. Okay. But he managed to bring with him all of the elders of Israel. So then you have to pause and say, well, was there something to what was happening here that, for example, Korah had this idea that there ought to be a rotation of leadership, or that it should be more democratic, or something along these lines that all these people must have felt as well. Otherwise, they would have said to Korah, get lost. I mean, we're not listening to you. We're listening to Moses. He's the leader. And there was dissatisfaction with Moses and so on. So, was it all that awful, really, what he was doing?
Well,
That's the question.
you know what? I'm very sympathetic to that question because, we can read the story on, as you know, so many levels, and one level that I enjoy reading it is to not engage in hagiography about Moses. That is to be very critical about Moses. Moses, look what we've gone through already. We've gone through this moment of the spies. The spies is a failure on, of course, with the spies, but Moses is, the buck stops with him, and it's a failure of leadership also. I argue this in Sheol this past week that you send these people out on a mission, and you're in the locker room, before the third period, right? And you're giving you don't want to, you want to give them a pep talk, and you want to tell them, here's what we got to accomplish. Here's what we got to do. And I know you can do it. I know each one of you has a certain talent. And the fact is, he doesn't do that. He doesn't in any way give them a kind of Gegesund and Kumgesund, a blessing, even a little blessing, right? And he's not focused on them. What he's focused on is the land. And in a way, as my colleague, Rabbi Chesler says, he's like, he may be good at this, but there's certain things he's really not good at. And one of the things that he's not good at is this is the art. The art of leadership is to be able to connect to people, to everybody where they're at. Not everybody has that. I think that's, it's they're remarkable skills. I mean, we all have our criticisms, and of course, I as a rabbi certainly subject to many criticism, and I understand it. You're good at some things, you're not good at some things. That's true. Some are all-stars, some are good at everything for sure. Okay, but some, they're good at this, they're not good at that. And when you're good at one thing and you're not good at other things, well, there are consequences to that. Now, we like the whole package, yeah, we're going to keep that, but the consequences are that occasionally they're going to be, these events. In this case, so how, if I want to have the audacity to rewrite the Bible and say, how could we have avoided this altogether, right? And I suspect that Moses could have been a better politician, and he could have at least conveyed to Korah, you're important to us. You know what? Not everybody gets to be the leader and all that. And he tries a little bit of this, but it says you're important. You have a blessed role. You have, this is the way that you can convey God's spirit to the people is by doing this. There's no small thing. There's no small task. Yes, this is the way it operates. I mean, it's probably not effective, but he could have done it a little better than he did it, I think. So yes.
The other side to this, picking up on Stanley's comment, is that how do you prevent anarchy from taking place and everybody eating everybody else up if you don't have leadership of some sort?
Sure.
The pushback to this, right? But I think that one of the other comments that I've seen is that when there are disagreements, when is it a disagreement that doesn't become personal versus, just like Hillel and Shammai, in terms of machlochet or an argument? Perhaps it's all the other people that worsened the situation for Korah, because they all came into the act and there was discord amongst all of them for their reasons. So I don't want to put it all on Korah either, because I think plenty of other difficult players in this.
Sure. I would, we would turn to Stanley and ask about how living with guilt, you're a psychologist, guilt is hell. And if you could just make a comment about that, you know, when a patient is struggling with guilt, how does that relegate them to a kind of purgatory in some ways? You know, what does it mean to live with that?
Well, it means that they're self-flagellating. They're constantly, questioning themselves and seeing themselves as awful and terrible and so on. And you have to sort of unpack that and see where it's coming from and why is it usually more extreme than it needs to be, and how can you get back to a place of, well, I did something wrong, but I don't deserve to go down to Sheol necessarily, you know. So I read somewhere that with Korah, the question was raised, I don't know if it's in Pirkei Avot or somewhere, that what they say about Korah is that his arguments, or what he wanted to do, was not l'shem shamayim. It was
That's
not
right.
heaven, but was because of out of his own arrogance, I guess. And he wanted to take the reins. So it can be looked at, as you say, Rabbi, from different points of view. But I think we do have to consider that, well, as Robert says, yes, you don't want anarchy, you need leadership. But the question is it always the same leader that you want? Because the reasons that every leader has their faults, and we have a system of government, for example, where we were required to have a rotation of leadership. And that's not a bad thing. And that's one of the reasons we make such a fuss when someone tries to stay in power when he's not supposed to.
Well, that's it. We should have a compromise, a constitutional monarchy. That's what we should.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Monarchy. So.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you all. We'll see you next week. Next week will be our last class.